All right. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us during the Lytham Partners Spring 2022 Investor Conference. My name is Robert Blum, Managing Partner of Lytham Partners. And during this webcast, we welcome Arianne Phosphate, ticker symbol of DAN on the TSX Venture and DRRSF on the OTC, and their president, Brian Ostroff. Today, I've asked Brian to run through the slide presentation. If there's time available at the end, we'll engage in a Q&A session. But before I do turn it over to Brian, I want to remind everyone that management is available for one-on-one meetings later this week. If you have not already signed up, you can go ahead and do one of two things. Send me an email at blum@lythampartners.com or visit our website at lythampartners.com/virtual. Click on the one-on-one meeting request button and we will look to get you taken care of. So with that said, let me turn the presentation over to Brian Ostroff, President of Arianne Phosphate. Brian, please proceed.
All right. Thank you, Robert. So everyone, thank you for taking some time to listen in on this presentation. As Robert had said, I'm going to quickly run through the deck and leave a little bit of time for some Q&A. So one important thing to understand really when you're talking about the ags and the ferts is the cycles run really long. We were in a 7-year downtrend, 2012 to 2019, and pretty much since 2020, summer of 2020, things have definitely started to pick up. I invite you to read our cautionary statement. So what is phosphate? Phosphate's one of the 3 macronutrients used in fertilizer, potash and nitrogen being the other 2. And it's interesting and important to understand that although they're all used in fertilizer, they're not the same, and they really do have their own supply-demand dynamics. Now, in the case of phosphate, not all phosphates are the same. When you take gold and you take it out of the ground and you process it, all that gold is the same, regardless of where in the world you dug it up. Phosphate just is not the same. And so in general, most of the world's phosphate comes from sedimentary deposits, which are challenging in terms of other deleterious elements in there, namely radioactive elements and heavy metals. And as I'm sure you can appreciate, since you're talking about things like food and fertilizer, not a wonderful thing. There are continuing concerns and an awareness around this. Legislation has been put in to try and restrict some of these deleterious elements, and this is a process that is probably going to continue to move forward. Now, there are these rare deposits, igneous. There's maybe a dozen in the world or so, and that is what Arianne has. The beautiful thing about the Arianne deposit is we do not have any challenges with these radioactive elements or any of these heavy metals, and it allows us to make quite a pure phosphate concentrate. The other thing, as you'll see in this chart, is, again, unlike something like a gold where it will trade at the same price everywhere in the world, phosphate will trade based on the quality of that phosphate. So a higher purity phosphate, such as Arianne's, will trade and has traded historically at a pretty substantial premium over benchmark phosphate. Now, most people realize that phosphate is used in fertilizer, and of course, 85% of phosphate does wind up in fertilizer. That said, we are definitely seeing expanding demands in various specialty applications. It's used in food preservatives, so if you're eating deli meats or carbonated sodas or things like that. It's used in animal feeds, cosmetics, detergents. Interestingly, it is also used in industrial processes. It's actually used in the production of semiconductors. And one area that has seemed to have gotten a lot of attention as of late are LFP batteries, lithium iron phosphate batteries. Now, some of you may have been watching the battery material space and have come to know about the LFP battery, lithium iron phosphate battery. And this battery has actually grown quite a bit in terms of companies that will be using them, that have switched over to them. Tesla made big news when they had announced that all of their standard range vehicles globally are going to be using these LFPs. And as well, companies like Ford, Volkswagen, GM, all doing that. Even Rivian, a couple of weeks back, have said that they were going to follow Tesla's lead and move most of their standard range vehicles also to these LFPs. Of interest as well is, although most people know of the LFP battery primarily for cars, it is emerging in things like home storage, small grid, and as Tesla has talked about, they think that a lot of energy storage will ultimately fall to the LFP battery. Now, the LFP battery as well is a story of security of supply. As you may know, some of the materials needed for batteries, rare earths, cobalt, nickel, a lot of this comes from areas in the world that are just not of the same level of security as would be, say, from more Western jurisdictions. Here in Quebec, which is where the Arianne project is situated, there's been a big move to the development of these batteries here. British Volt has announced, GM, BASF, all looking to set up shop here in Quebec. Now, one of the things about the LFP battery, and we'll get into this a little bit more shortly, is not any phosphate is going to work in the LFP battery. You will require a phosphate concentrate that is of a better quality. And again, that's something where Arianne will very much fit the bill. So in terms of phosphate itself and the supply and demand, most of the world is short phosphate. We are all by and large importers. North America runs a deficit, South America, Western Europe, a lot of areas of Asia. We all run a deficit and we need to import. And as well, phosphate is one of those commodities where demand grows every single year. So we are all short and getting shorter. And so where do we get this from? And the answer is, by and large, the Middle East and North Africa when it comes to the phosphate concentrate, the material that gets turned into fertilizers or battery acids or things like that. Now, of course, that is a bit of a challenge. Morocco today is by far the world's largest. And look, Morocco is a good jurisdiction, but it is a jurisdiction within a region that in the past historically has had geopolitical issues. Tunisia, Syria used to be substantial producers. Today, with their exit in the market, Jordan, Algeria, and Egypt have all expanded their production. Saudi Arabia has a fair amount, but they don't sell that phosphate concentrate. They will only sell fertilizer. And Russia, which is now, of course, very much a challenging geopolitical environment, is the only producer of an extremely high purity phosphate concentrate, similar to what Arianne can make. So look, we need to understand that these are the areas that we are reliant on for the phosphate that we need to make the fertilizer that we need to grow the grains that we need to eat. Now, in terms of the business of phosphate, most phosphate winds up being integrated. That production is owned by the guys who make that downstream asset, such as the fertilizer, the MAP, the DAP. And it's no different than any other business in that if you are not vertically integrated, your profitability gets challenged. Now, one of the things that we have seen is the regions that have had that excess phosphate capacity, that phosphate concentrate, what they are doing is they are expanding their own fertilizer operations. So what that does mean is for those who do not have enough of their own phosphate concentrate, they need to go and buy it, source it, secure it somewhere else so that they can make that fertilizer. Here in North America, again, we are reliant on imports for large companies like a Mosaic or a Nutrient to make that phosphate fertilizer. And that 15% that's not integrated is getting harder to find and, of course, more expensive, which is what sets up very nicely for Arianne, which is the only large-scale source of independent phosphate rock projected to come on stream within the next few years. Now, I'd actually say maybe 3 months ago, many of you didn't realize how much the price of fertilizer has been moving. As of late, people have started to pay attention. And we have seen pretty substantial moves off of the lows in 2020. And it's only recently, however, that we took out those last cycle highs of kind of 2012. Now, for 7 years, as I mentioned, we had a downtrend, and not a whole lot of people worried about supply, because even though prices were moving down and demand was going up, no one paid much attention to expanding that supply. Very few companies did. And so after 7 years of not too much of a concern around supply, and as I had mentioned, demand growing every single year, you get to that inflection point. And that is what we've seen. Unfortunately, I don't believe that the prices are going to stop here. There really is a supply-demand imbalance, especially when you factor in some of the recent events. So what are those events? Of course, there is no longer particularly good access to Russian fertilizers. China had halted back the end of last year their export of phosphate fertilizers. So where the Middle East is a big producer of the phosphate concentrate, that raw input into the fertilizers, China is a big producer of those actual phosphate fertilizers, MAP and DAP. They represent 30% of the market, and they exited the market. Russia has exited the market. They are roughly 10% of the market. That's 40%. As well, we've seen global grain and oilseed markets getting stronger and stronger. And we've had a move towards decarbonization, which is greater demand for biofuels. So what you have here is basically the perfect storm where supply hasn't increased. You have had supply shocks, demand is there, and prices are moving higher. So I talked about grain prices. As you can see, we've seen a pretty big surge here when it comes to those price of those grains. And again, unfortunately, what we've seen out of Russia and the Ukraine is going to have an extremely big effect on supply of some of these grains, particularly wheat. I talked a bit about Arab Spring. Now, Arab Spring happened back around 2011. And, if you'll notice, that's when we saw the last big increases in the price of grains. And ultimately, that means an increase in the price of food, greater food insecurity. And there are many that believe that that is what triggered Arab Spring. Well, unfortunately, today, we see ourselves in a very similar situation. Ukraine, which is referred to as the breadbasket of Europe, is also actually the breadbasket of the Middle East. And phosphate producing countries such as Egypt, Morocco, Tunisia, they are all heavily reliant on wheat imports from the Ukraine. And I suspect, unfortunately, it's going to be a challenging situation. So with that, let's talk about Arianne and our Lac project, truly a world-class project. So we are extremely well located. We are in the province of Quebec in Canada. As you can tell by that yellow dot, we are not particularly far north. We are just outside of the Saguenay, Lac St area, well populated, good labor force, and as well, we are ideally situated in that we are out of that population center, but a lot of the needed infrastructure already exists. One of the challenges with large projects a lot of time is the need to build out and spend a tremendous amount of money on your infrastructure. Arianne is very fortunate. The project has access 30 kilometers away to a hydroelectric dam, hydroelectricity, clean, renewable, relatively inexpensive, and where many mines are actually powered by fossil fuels, which have gone up extremely over the last while. You know, Arianne will not be subject to those kinds of swings in the energy market. Oversized haul road already exists, takes us down to a waterway that allows for large ships year-round out on the St. Lawrence, in on the Atlantic Ocean, and our ability to ship this product wherever it's needed. We already have received our permits for a loading facility on the North Shore. The Port of Saguenay operates loading facilities on the South Shore. This project is extremely large. When the feasibility study came out, we had indicated a 26-year life of mine, 3 million tons a year. That is very big. Subsequent to that, we have drilled off a lot more. And in the picture's worth 1,000 words, here it is. Today, we are projected to have amongst, if not the purest phosphate concentrate. We have the largest, and we are here in Quebec. So again, when I talk about a world-class asset, we are talking about the world's largest, purest, and arguably the safest phosphate deposit. We are fully permitted and construction ready. We have the support of the local communities, the First Nations, and as well the government of Quebec, which, by the way, is an investor in Arianne of about 6% of the company. We have continued to improve the project. As I said, we did have a 7-year downtrend, and with that, a lot of projects did not move forward. We have been able to advance ours, greater recoveries, higher concentrate grades, and lower cost of operations. For those of you who like chemistry, there's an idea of our spec. We've improved our transportation plan, and we are currently in the process of sourcing our offtake agreements. Phosphate is one of those commodities that does not trade on an exchange, and you don't sell it into an exchange like gold or copper. You enter into contracts with would-be buyers. We have been successful in executing a few of these deals and look to execute a couple more and unlock our financing. Those discussions with off-takers are both in the world of agricultural as well as specialty applications. So look, you, the investor, here's the opportunity. Arianne did have a $160 million market cap back in 2012, the last time people cared about fertilizer. Analyst coverage, et cetera, and then the industry rolled over. And when a tree falls, and there's no one there to hear it, it doesn't make a sound. So as Arianne's project moved forward and got better and better, fewer and fewer people cared, fewer and fewer people watched. And the market cap did this despite us receiving our permits, collaboration agreement with First Nations, customers, etc. Well, about a year ago, people started to realize what was going on, and there really aren't a lot of options out there. And so our market cap has improved, although today we would still need about a 50% move from where we are today, even to get us back to where we were before we had made these advancements. We too are looking at the possibility of a downstream asset, maybe more for a battery grade acid. And there is a little look at our capital structure. We do have large shareholders, as mentioned, the Quebec government there at about 5.5%, 6%, several funds, insiders. I personally own and am a big shareholder in Arianne, roughly 2%. We have a great team to move this forward, all very senior executives and managers. And so in closing, Arianne, we will be developing the next major phosphate mine, premier low-risk mining jurisdiction, permitted, high-quality deposit, offtakes already starting to be in place, and really just truly a world-class asset. I thank you for your time, and maybe Robert, back to you if you have some questions.
Yeah, that'd be perfect here. Why don't you stop the screen share there, Brian? Perfect. Yeah, we've got a couple of minutes here for some questions. So, I mean, look, first off, the macro, you do not paint a very pretty picture of what's going on in the market here. You know, what is your opinion at the end of the day of how this all really plays out, and maybe what needs to change going forward?
Yeah, so, you know, unfortunately, it's not a pretty picture. I think that the short to medium term is going to continue to be challenging. You know, I touched on it, but just to give a little bit deeper numbers, you know, areas like Egypt, for example, they receive 80% of their wheat from the Ukraine and Western Russia. So we're going to have a problem because those grains aren't coming. You know, I think we all hope for peace. We'd love this thing to be resolved tomorrow. But even with that, we're not going to be able to plant. And that means that food is not coming. So it is not going to, unfortunately, get better. And also, even if we had peace tomorrow, I think the whole idea of security of supply, that's not going to change. If there's peace tomorrow, I don't think people are going to hurry to rush back and be reliant on areas like Russia for their fertilizer. So look, short term, I don't think there's much you can do. In the medium to longer term, I think people will, again, come to realize the importance of fertilizer, of phosphate, projects like Arianne. Arianne was one of the fortunate ones. We were able to move things forward during bad times. A lot of other projects stalled, and I guess as time goes on, these projects will come back and emerge. But look, we really need to address this issue because it's not going away.
All right. You know, as you just mentioned there, Arianne's sitting on a very important asset in the world here. Help people understand what are the exact steps needed to take this forward here.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. The need is there. Like there's no getting around it. We can live with a lot without a lot of other commodities, but food's a pretty tough thing to live without. You know, at this point, look, the need is there. The economics are incredibly compelling. So for us, our path forward here, as I had indicated in the presentation, are offtakes. So the banks have come, the banks they want to see that we have customers. And so those conversations are moving forward, definitely moving forward a little bit more rapidly in light of what's going on. And I should highlight, as I had talked about briefly in the presentation, our stuff works in fertilizers, but it also works in batteries and other specialty applications. I need offtake. And so whether that is from ferts or batteries or what have you, as well as you might assume that beyond offtakes, we are having conversations around partnerships coming in on part of the asset for companies that really do want to make sure they get back to fully vertically integrated. So, our job over the coming quarters is to sign up the last of that offtake, release the financing, or bring on a partner and unlock what would be enormous value.
You just mentioned this just a second ago here with batteries here, but you got the first side of the demand equation, and then you've got the battery side of the demand equation here, both of which are playing sort of into your hands, I guess, if you will. How does that sort of play itself out as it relates to demand for phosphate here?
Yeah. So look, the world was already on a path to decarbonization, trying to move away from fossil fuels. That brought things like biodiesel, et cetera, which already meant that the farmer, the grower, had to address this. But beyond the environmental now, you've got other issues where, again, Russia is a big supplier of fossil fuels, and people want to try and move away from that. But it takes time. It's a process. The LFP battery, the lithium iron phosphate battery, has definitely emerged here. And there's a lot of reasons, which we won't get into now, but the LFP battery makes a lot of sense. Cost, availability of the ingredients. A lot of batteries were nickel based. Well, Russia's a big producer of nickel. Nickel prices went through the roof. That's caused some battery companies to rethink what batteries they're going to be using. So look, the LFP has come. It's definitely emerged. You're going to need phosphate, but the reality is not any phosphate will do. You do have to turn it into a battery grade asset. And, that's a place where Arianne can thrive. Look, we can power the body through food, and we can power the car or ultimately the home through energy.
Right. Last point here. I think we just got a minute or two left, and you touched upon it right at the very end there. But the stock has acted a little bit better here of late. Obviously, not to the levels from a capitalization perspective of where things were. Just sort of any final thoughts there as it relates to the security.
Yeah. Look, the stock is definitely acting a little bit better, but we still have a long way to go compared to where we were. And really, to me, I think it's a matter of perception starting to catch up to reality, because really the reality hasn't changed. I mean, we have always needed phosphate. We will always need phosphate. We need to eat. We get phosphate by and large from places in the world that I think we would prefer not to be reliant on. And demand for phosphate grows every single year. Well, that's the reality. The reality hasn't changed. What has changed is the perception. People see prices moving up. People see these shocks to the system. People are coming back and understanding what this means. And so I think you have a massive gap between perception and reality. And we've started to close that gap as perception has grown. Investors are starting to look. They are starting to understand. Just in the month of March, between the Canadian and the US exchanges, we've traded 29 million shares. So that tells me that people are starting to take notice. Ag, ferts, they should always be in the portfolio. Ag is a non-correlated investment. And if you are concerned about inflation, which you should very much be concerned about, what's inflating? The price of your food. So if you want to protect against inflation, you should probably have some investments in this space. And so at the end of the day, you look at a company like Arianne, we're trading at such a small amount relative to our NPV. And even look, again, some of the people watching this presentation, they know the battery materials. Those companies are trading at valuations 10, 15, 20 times that of Arianne. And they're nowhere near as advanced. And at the end of the day, we can live without a Tesla. We can't live without food. Phosphate is necessary. We can provide phosphate to both markets. And so, look, I think that for those investors looking for an opportunity, I think Arianne looks pretty well placed.
Let's leave it on that note there, Brian. Thanks so much for the time today. As always, we greatly appreciate it. I just want to remind everyone out there, if you have not already signed up for a one-on-one meeting, send me an email, bloom@lythampartners.com, or again, visit the website for additional details. We hope you all enjoy the conference. Brian, thank you again for your time. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you.